Hi and welcome back! In the last video, we explored the age of absolutism and how national sovereignty, useful in the past, now blocks effective climate action. Today, we go deeper into climate consensus politics, what it is, why it repeatedly fails, and why the failure isn't about science, but about the political structures behind global climate agreements. We'll see how consensus became the rule in the United Nations climate process, how it concentrates power in the few actors, and how it weakens ambition even when the science is crystal clear. And finally, we'll look at how the Global Climate Authority could help close this gap, not by replacing countries, but by providing what the climate system still lacks: an independent mechanism of accountability. Let's begin. So, how does the consensus rule actually work in the United Nations climate negotiations? According to researchers at Springer Nature, consensus means that a deal is adopted as long as no country formally objects. And that's exactly how it works in the United Nations climate process. But here's the nuance. Consensus does not mean that all countries agree. It only means that none decide to actively block the decision. This gives every country de facto veto power, including those with strong fossil fuel interests, strategic geopolitical priorities, or very different levels of climate vulnerability. And when even a single country threatens a veto, negotiations can be delayed, softened, or collapse entirely. That's the paradox. One country can hold 197 others in place. Whether it's to protect fossil interests or to prevent ambition from being weakened, the result is the same. Politics overrides the planet and the law stands still. So, why did the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change adopt consensus instead of voting? The logic was simple: fear. Climate policy involves extreme risks to national sovereignty, energy systems, and economic structures. Countries demanded a safeguard, essentially saying we will participate only if we cannot be forced into rules we don't want. Both sides of the debate needed it. Small states feared being dominated by large powers, and large powers feared binding constraints on their key industries. The result? Consensus became the universal compromise everyone accepted, and the structural obstacle nobody can escape. The consequence is the paradox we face. One country can block 197 countries, effectively reducing hard law obligations to mere soft law promises. Who really shapes the COP agenda? The agenda of a COP doesn't appear magically on day one. It is built months earlier by three different actors. First, the subsidiary bodies, the SBSTA and the SBI, identify what science, implementation gaps and Paris Agreement obligations require urgent attention. Second, the COP presidency selects the political priorities it wants to highlight that year. And third, the parties themselves propose items they want to add or block. The final agenda is only adopted at the start of the COP, and sometimes even delayed, because a single country can object. So, before the negotiations even begin, the structure of what can be discussed and what cannot is already defined. Now, let's look at who actually shapes the final consensus. The UNFCCC Secretariat provides the legal and procedural backbone of the COP. It keeps the process running, but it does not decide the substance of the agreements. The real political weight sits with the COP presidency. The President sets the tone, controls the agenda, drafts the first versions of the text, manages consultations, and ultimately is the only person who can declare that consensus has been reached. Most negotiations happen through blocs. The EU, the G77 plus China, the Umbrella Group, BASIC, AOSIS, and others. These coalitions meet separately, rewrite language among themselves, and then bring coordinated positions back to the room. And much of the decisive deal-making takes place in informal spaces, small consultations, closed-door meetings, and last-minute huddles that are not visible in the public plenary. So, although the process is global in scope, the power that shapes the consensus is far from evenly distributed, and the final outcome tends to reflect political compromise, not the scientific limits of the planet. And what about NGOs, indigenous peoples, and local communities, the groups most directly affected by climate breakdown? In the United Nations climate system, they are formally admitted as observers. Observers can lobby, organize events, and publicly pressure delegates. And this matters. It keeps the process transparent and accountable. But their influence stops at the negotiation door. They have zero voting power and zero veto power. The communities that suffer the most have no authority to shape the final text. And this creates a structural accountability gap. Political consensus becomes insulated from the ethical and scientific urgency expressed by civil society. The crisis is global, but power remains national. So, consensus is, in practice, the strongest shield of national sovereignty. It guarantees that no country can ever be bound by a rule it does not accept, which means economic priorities can always override environmental limits. This protects states, but it also means that the planetary system has no legal representation. Science can warn, civil society can protest, but the final decision is always political, never ecological. So the core problem becomes clear. A system designed to protect sovereignty cannot, by itself, protect a shared climate. We need a decision-making structure where planetary boundaries, ethics, and scientific necessity actually have standing, not just national interests. The problem isn't the science. The science already gives us a climate consensus. What must be done, how fast, and why? The real problem is political consensus, a negotiation model where every country must agree. So ambition is kept at the lowest common denominator. Climate consensus exists. Political consensus is what fails. The Global Climate Authority, GCA, isn't about replacing the UNFCCC. It's about fixing the gap between scientific consensus and political consensus. Its role is simple. Take the climate consensus already defined by the SBs and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, turn it into binding action that doesn't depend on 198 countries agreeing every year. Not a consensus of politics, but a consensus of responsibility. Consensus will always matter, but what kind of consensus determines our future? We already have a scientific consensus. We lack the governance to act on it. That's why the planet needs more than conferences. It needs a climate authority. Thanks for watching. Every system begins with a shared belief, and this one begins with ours. The Global Climate Authority is a citizen-led initiative rooted in a simple idea. Responsibility is something we all share. In the next video, we'll keep exploring how global governance can evolve and what it means to build institutions that truly protect the planet. See you there. Bye.